Take a moment to rest. Let your body relax. Inhale softly, and then exhale. This quiet movement you just felt, the rise and fall of your chest, is part of a delicate and ongoing process known as respiration. It happens without effort, yet it is one of the most important rhythms in the body. Respiration is not only the act of breathing, it is also the way your cells receive the energy they need to keep you alive. Let's begin here, at the very start. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast forest. Each tree, each leaf, gently exchanging gases with the air. The human body does something very similar. Every breath we take draws oxygen in a gas we cannot live without, and every exhale releases carbon dioxide, a waste gas made deep inside our cells. This cycle, repeated thousands of times each day, is more than just air moving in and out. It is a life-sustaining exchange, a conversation between the body and the atmosphere. Respiration has two main meanings. One is the physical act of breathing, the movement of air in and out of the lungs. This is sometimes called external respiration. The second is what happens at the cellular level. Inside every cell, tiny energy centers known as mitochondria use oxygen to create fuel. This is known as internal or cellular respiration. In simple terms, oxygen comes in, carbon dioxide goes out, and in between, your body transforms that oxygen into energy. But for all of this to work, there must be a system, a structure to move the air, muscles to drive it, blood vessels to carry gases, and delicate tissues where the exchange takes place. This is the respiratory system. We can divide it into two main parts. The first is anatomy. This is the physical structure, the airways, lungs, and supporting tissues. The second is physiology, how those structures work together to keep you breathing moment after moment. Let's take a brief walk through the system just to get a sense of the journey ahead. Air usually enters through the nose or mouth. It passes through the throat, moves into a strong tube called the trachea, and then branches off into two smaller passages called bronchi, one leading to each lung. Inside the lungs, the air keeps branching, getting smaller and smaller, until it reaches tiny air sacs known as alveoli. These alveoli are soft, balloon-like structures surrounded by tiny blood vessels. This is where oxygen enters the blood, and carbon dioxide leaves it. It's quiet here, gentle, precise. Once the oxygen is in the blood, it travels to every corner of the body, to the brain, the heart, the muscles, and every living cell. There, inside the cells, the oxygen is used to unlock energy from nutrients like sugar and fat. This is cellular respiration, the body's version of burning fuel, but without flames or heat, only quiet transformation. And as the cells finish their work, they release carbon dioxide. That gas returns to the lungs through the bloodstream. Then it is exhaled. The cycle begins again. This entire process is happening all the time, while you study, while you sleep, even when you're not aware of it. And it's all controlled by your brain, by tiny sensors in your body, and by the balance of gases in your blood. In the coming sections, we will explore each part of this system more closely, from the nose to the alveoli, from muscle movement to gas exchange, slowly, clearly, and without rush. For now, just remember this: every breath is more than air. It is a quiet act of survival, a soft connection between your body and the world around you. Breathe in again, let it go. This is the first breath of learning, and we are just beginning. Transitioning now to the next step of our journey, the path that air follows as it first enters the body. Let's return now to the breath, not just the breath itself, but the path it follows. With this section, we arrive at the beginning of that path, the gateway between the outside world and the deep chambers of the lungs. Air usually enters the body through the nose. This may seem like a simple detail, but the nose is more than just an opening. It is a carefully designed filter, a warmer, a humidifier, and a silent guard. As you gently inhale, air moves through the nostrils, also called the nares. Inside, there is a space called the nasal cavity. This hollow chamber is divided into left and right sides by a structure known as the nasal septum. Lining the walls of this space is a special tissue called mucosa, a soft, moist layer that helps protect the lungs from harmful particles. Tiny hairs, called cilia, move in waves, sweeping dust and microorganisms toward the throat. Sticky mucus traps many of these particles, like flypaper, catching unwanted guests. This helps clean the air before it goes deeper into the body. The nasal cavity also warms and moistens the air. Cold, dry air could irritate the delicate tissues of the lungs. So before it continues on its journey, the air is softened, made gentle. This small act of care happens with every breath. Within the nasal cavity, there are 3 curved structures on each side called turbinates. You can imagine them like shelves or ridges. They increase the surface area inside the nose and create gentle swirls in the air. This swirling motion gives more time for the air to be warmed and cleaned. In a way, it's like letting the air take a slow dance before moving on. If the nose is blocked, we breathe through the mouth. The mouth does not filter or warm the air as well, but it does offer a wider and faster route. This is helpful during exercise or when the nose is congested. From here, the air flows into the pharynx. This is a tube that begins behind the nose and mouth and continues down toward the throat. It is often called the throat, though it has 3 parts. The nasopharynx sits behind the nose, the oropharynx lies behind the mouth, and the laryngopharynx is the part that leads toward the voice box. The pharynx is shared by both air and food, so the body has a special way to keep these 2 paths separate. Here we meet the epiglottis. It is a soft flap made of cartilage, strong but flexible. When you breathe, the epiglottis lifts, allowing air to flow downward into the windpipe. But when you swallow, it folds downward to cover the entrance to the airways. This prevents food or drink from going into the lungs. You can think of the epiglottis like a tiny gate that opens and closes with each action. Now the air reaches the larynx. This is also known as the voice box. It sits just above the trachea or windpipe. It plays 2 important roles, allowing air to pass into the lungs and helping create sound when we speak. Inside the larynx are the vocal cords. These are small, delicate bands of tissue. When air passes through them, they vibrate and create sound. The pitch and volume of your voice depend on how tightly the cords are stretched. Though this sound-making role is fascinating, in this moment of rest, the vocal cords remain still. The larynx simply acts as a passageway, guiding air toward the lungs. The larynx is made up of several pieces of cartilage. The most well-known is the thyroid cartilage, which forms the Adam's apple. Beneath it is the cricoid cartilage, shaped like a ring. Together, these structures give support to the airway, keeping it open at all times. As we reach the end of the upper respiratory tract, let's pause and reflect. Each part, from the nose to the throat, from the epiglottis to the larynx, works in quiet harmony. There is no rushing, no forcing, only soft movement and gentle function. You might not notice these structures in everyday life, but they notice everything that passes through them. They protect, they prepare, they guide. They are the keepers of the breath's beginning, and with every inhale, they open their gates, welcoming air, that unseen gift, into the body. From here, the journey of the breath continues downward. Next, we will follow it deeper into the chest, through larger airways, and closer to the place where oxygen and blood meet. Let us move on now, slowly, to the lower respiratory tract. The breath continues its journey. It has passed through the nose, the throat, the voice box. Now it enters deeper spaces, places protected by the ribs and wrapped in quiet movement. The first stop in this new chapter is the trachea. You might know it as the windpipe. It is a strong but flexible tube that begins just below the larynx and travels down into the chest. Its structure is shaped by a series of C-shaped rings made of cartilage. These rings help the trachea stay open so that air can move freely with every breath. The open part of each C faces toward the back, toward the esophagus, allowing space when you swallow. The inside of the trachea is lined with soft, hair-like structures called cilia, along with a layer of mucus. Together, they trap and move dust, bacteria, and other particles upward, away from the lungs. This process is sometimes called the mucociliary escalator, a gentle cleanup system, always at work. As the trachea moves down the chest, it eventually splits in two. This point of division is called the carina. It is shaped like a short ridge, sitting right where the windpipe branches. Here, air is divided. Some goes left and some goes right into the primary bronchi. Each primary bronchus leads to a lung. The right bronchus is wider, shorter, and more vertical. The left bronchus is longer and curves more sharply to make space for the heart. Both bronchi enter the lungs through a region called the hilum, a small doorway where blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves also pass. Once inside the lungs, the bronchi begin to branch. Like the limbs of a tree, they divide again and again, from primary bronchi to secondary bronchi, also called lobar bronchi, and then to tertiary or segmental bronchi. Each new level is smaller than the one before. The secondary bronchi lead to each lobe of the lung. The right lung has 3 lobes. The left has 2 shaped gently around the heart. As the bronchi continue to branch, they eventually become so small that they are called bronchioles. Unlike the larger bronchi, these bronchioles no longer have cartilage to support them. Instead, they rely on the smooth muscles in their walls, which can tighten or relax to control airflow. The bronchioles lead to even finer tubes known as terminal bronchioles, and then to respiratory bronchioles. At this point, we begin to approach the true destination, the place where gas exchange can finally occur. At the very end of this branching system are small clusters of alveoli. Each cluster looks like a bunch of grapes, soft, round, and delicate. The Alveoli are tiny air sacs. There are around 300 million of them in the human lungs. Together, they create a surface area of roughly 70 square meters, about the size of a tennis court. All of that space is dedicated to one purpose: letting oxygen in and letting carbon dioxide out. The walls of the alveoli are paper-thin, just a single cell thick. Next to them lie tiny blood vessels, capillaries, also lined by a single layer of cells. This closeness allows gases to move easily from the air into the blood, and from the blood back into the air. The alveoli are not alone in their work. They are supported by special helper cells. Some produce a slippery substance called surfactant, which reduces tension and keeps the alveoli from collapsing. Others act like immune guards, quietly removing dust or bacteria that reach this far. If you were to zoom out and look at the lungs as a whole, their structure would remind you of a tree turned upside down. The trachea as the trunk, the bronchi as large branches, the bronchioles as twigs, and the alveoli as soft leaves, breathing in oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide. This branching pattern is not just beautiful, it is efficient. It allows the lungs to fill with air quickly and evenly, even with a single calm breath, and it helps maintain a balance between airflow and blood flow so that every cell in the body can be fed. The lungs themselves are wrapped in a soft tissue covering called the pleura, a topic we will visit soon. For now, just know that the lungs rest gently inside the chest, expanding and relaxing like a pair of slow-moving waves. This part of the respiratory system, the lower tract, is where the most important exchange takes place. But none of it works alone. The bronchi support the bronchos lead to the alveoli, and the alveoli work in silence, breath after breath, keeping the blood fresh and ready. Pause for a moment. Imagine this inner forest where each branch is a tube and each leaf is a living unit. They move as you move. They pause as you pause. They continue even as you sleep. The path of the air is nearly complete. In our next section, we will step even closer into the alveoli themselves, where breath becomes exchange and air becomes life. Now we arrive at the end of the airway's path, and yet, in many ways, we are only just beginning. The air has traveled far through the nose, the throat, the trachea, and through countless branching tubes. Each step has brought it closer to this moment. Here, at the very edge of the lungs, we find the alveoli, small, silent, soft. Each alveola, singular for alveoli, is a tiny air sac. Together, these sacs form a delicate forest where the breath meets the blood. There are about 300 million alveoli in the lungs. That number is difficult to imagine. Picture a bunch of grapes, not just in your hand, but filling a large room, round and light, barely touching. Their total surface area, when spread out, would cover a space the size of a tennis court, and every square inch of it is involved in a quiet, continuous task, the exchange of gases. This exchange is simple in concept, yet profound in effect. Oxygen comes in, carbon dioxide goes out. Let's explore how this happens. When you inhale, fresh air fills the alveoli. That air contains oxygen, a gas your body needs to survive. Lying right next to each alveolus is a capillary, a tiny blood vessel, so small that red blood cells must squeeze through in single file. These capillaries carry blood that has returned from the body. It is low in oxygen. It is high in carbon dioxide, a waste product made by cells. At this meeting point, oxygen moves from the alveoli into the blood, and carbon dioxide moves from the blood into the alveoli. This quiet transfer is called diffusion. Diffusion happens because of something called a gradient. A gradient simply means difference. There is more oxygen in the alveoli than in the blood, so oxygen naturally moves toward the area where it is needed. At the same time, there is more carbon dioxide in the blood than in the alveoli, so it moves in the opposite direction, into the air sac, where it can be exhaled. This movement is helped by how thin the walls are. The barrier between air and blood is known as the *** respiratory membrane sing. It is incredibly thin, about 1/5000th of a millimeter, just 2 cells thick, one from the alveolus and one from the capillary. This allows gases to slip across easily without resistance. But such thinness could be dangerous, so the body has developed a special protector, a substance called surfactant. Surfactant is made by type 2 alveolar cells. It is a slippery, soapy coating that lines the inside of each alveolus. Its job is to reduce something called surface tension. Surface tension is the force that makes water droplets hold their shape inside the alveoli. It could cause the tiny sacs to collapse, but surfactant gently lowers that tension, helping each alveolus stay open and ready for gas exchange. You can think of surfactant as a quiet guardian, not flashy, but essential. Without it, breathing would take much more effort, and the smallest alveoli might close completely. The alveoli are also protected by a few immune cells, such as macrophages. These act like soft patrols, gently removing dust, bacteria, or any stray invaders that make it this far. They do their work in silence, without disturbing the fragile balance of exchange. Let us pause for a moment here. Picture the alveoli like mist-covered lakes at dawn, still, delicate, reflective. As air flows in, oxygen glides across the surface and joins the blood. As blood returns, carbon dioxide leaves and disappears into the breath. This cycle happens every second of the day. It happens when you are awake. It happens as you sleep. And often, it happens without you ever knowing. The efficiency of this system is remarkable. Each red blood cell passes by an alveolus in less than a second. Yet, in that moment, it can collect as much oxygen as it needs and let go of the carbon dioxide it carries. It is a brief handshake, a quiet transaction, and then the red blood cell moves on, refreshed and ready. This is how your body stays alive, not through loud effort, but through soft balance, through architecture that is both strong and fragile, through gradients and membranes and invisible helpers. And it's worth noting, this design is not random. It is purposeful. Each branching airway brings air closer to more alveoli. Each capillary wins past many air sacs. Together, they form a web, air and blood, dancing closely, never quite touching. As you listen now, this process is happening in your own chest. Inhaled air, filling tiny sacs, oxygen drifting across to your blood, carbon dioxide released, ready to be exhaled. All of it quiet, all of it continuous. And when something interrupts this balance, when alveoli collapse or become stiff, the effect is felt throughout the body. That is why diseases like pneumonia or pulmonary fibrosis can have such serious consequences. They don't just affect the lungs, they affect the body's ability to get what it needs from each breath. But in most moments, in the background of life, the alveoli carry on. Soft chambers of exchange, full of air, full of purpose. Now that we've seen where oxygen enters the blood, we can follow where that blood goes next. Our journey continues into the world of circulation, where breath becomes motion and oxygen begins its ride. Now, we gently shift our attention from the air-filled spaces of the lungs to the vessels that surround them. From the alveoli, those soft, mist-like chambers, our story moves into the blood. Here, we explore how oxygen is picked up, how carbon dioxide is dropped off, and how the circulatory and respiratory systems work together in harmony. This part of the journey begins with the right side of the heart, more specifically, the right ventricle. Its job is simple, yet essential. It pushes deoxygenated blood low in oxygen but rich in carbon dioxide, into a large vessel called the pulmonary artery. Despite the name, this artery carries blood that is not yet oxygenated. It splits into two main branches. One goes to the right lung and the other to the left. From there, these vessels divide again and again, becoming smaller with each step. Eventually, they become the pulmonary capillaries, thin, tiny tubes that wrap closely around each alveolus. At this meeting point, something elegant happens. The carbon dioxide carried by the blood is released into the alveolus, and the oxygen inside the alveolus slips quietly into the blood. This moment, where air and blood meet, is not loud. It is not rushed. It is like a soft handshake between systems, with nothing wasted. Once the exchange is complete, the blood is refreshed. It is now rich in oxygen. It has let go of its waste, and it is ready to travel onward. This oxygenated blood enters small vessels called pulmonary veins. There are 4 of them, 2 from each lung, and they return the blood to the left atrium of the heart. From there, it will be sent to the rest of the body to feed muscles, to fuel organs, to nourish every single cell. But for now, we stay here at the lungs, where this handoff occurs in perfect silence. This whole process is known as *** pulmonary circulation ***, and it is 1/2 of the body's complete blood flow system. The other half, called systemic circulation, moves oxygen-rich blood from the heart to the entire body. But pulmonary circulation is focused only on the lungs. It is a loop, a short, dedicated route where blood visits the lungs, becomes refreshed, and returns. It's important to understand that the lungs are not just passive balloons. They do more than receive air. They actively interact with blood, adjusting to its needs. In fact, the lungs are home to something called ventilation-perfusion matching. This term may sound complex, but its meaning is simple. Ventilation refers to airflow. Perfusion refers to blood flow. The lungs continuously try to match the two. If a certain part of the lung gets more air, the body sends more blood to that area. If another part receives less air, perhaps due to blockage or posture, blood is gently rerouted. This matching helps the lungs work efficiently. It ensures that oxygen is picked up where it's available, and that blood isn't wasted on areas that are poorly ventilated. Imagine 2 dancers moving in sync. One breathes, one flows. Together, they create a pattern that sustains life, step by step, breath by breath. The delicate capillaries around the alveoli are especially important. Their walls are thin, only one cell thick. This allows gases to cross easily, but it also makes them vulnerable. If blood pressure in these vessels becomes too high, the capillaries can leak. That's why pulmonary hypertension or high pressure in the lungs' blood vessels can be so dangerous. Yet, in most people, most of the time, the pulmonary circulation works beautifully, quietly, automatically. Each heartbeat pumps blood into the lungs. Each breath brings fresh air into contact with that blood. And this cycle repeats over and over, like waves returning to shore. Even as you lie still, listening, this process continues. Right now, your right heart is pumping. Your lungs are gently filling and emptying. And in the spaces between oxygen and carbon dioxide are trading places. Let us pause and reflect. The circulatory and respiratory systems are not separate stories. They are partners. The lungs need the heart to bring them blood. The heart needs the lungs to fill that blood with oxygen. Neither can do the job alone. When we breathe, we feel the chest rise and fall. But behind that motion is a deeper coordination, a quiet dance between air and blood, between breath and beat. And although these processes are deeply complex, they work together with grace. Like musicians in an orchestra, each playing their part, each listening to the other. This section of our journey reminds us that no system in the body exists in isolation. Every cell relies on oxygen. Every cell makes carbon dioxide. And so, the lungs and heart serve every part of us, every second. As we continue, we will shift our focus again. We will explore how the lungs themselves move, how the act of breathing happens, how air enters and leaves, and how the chest, the muscles, and the pressure all come together to support this rhythm. Now we pause and turn our attention to something quiet but essential. Not the air, not the blood, but the soft wrapping that cradles the lungs. Every lung, both right and left, is carefully enclosed in a delicate, double-layered membrane. This membrane is called the pleura. It is smooth, thin, and protective, like a transparent cloth that never tears. The pleura has two parts. The parietal pleura is the outer layer. It lines the inside of the chest wall and the surface of the diaphragm, the wide muscle beneath the lungs. The visceral pleura is the inner layer. It lies directly on the lungs themselves, hugging their curves and following every contour. These two layers face each other, but they do not touch. Between them is a small space known as the pleural cavity. Inside this cavity is a tiny amount of clear, slippery fluid. This pleural fluid acts like a natural lubricant. It allows the two pleural layers to glide smoothly as the lungs expand and relax, like silk sliding over silk. No friction, no pain, only ease. This quiet design is vital. Without the pleura, each breath would bring discomfort. The lungs would rub harshly against the inside of the chest. But thanks to this soft, simple system, movement becomes effortless. Imagine watching the wind lift a piece of fabric, not forcefully, but gently. That's how the pleura behaves, always adapting, always allowing. Now, let us turn our gaze to the lungs themselves. They are not one solid piece, but divided in two. Lobes, natural sections that help organize the work of breathing. The right lung has 3 lobes. They are called the upper, middle, and lower lobes. These are separated by two grooves known as fissures, the horizontal fissure and the oblique fissure. The left lung has only two lobes, the upper and lower. Why fewer? Because the left lung must share space with the heart. A gentle indentation, called the cardiac notch, makes room for the heart's curve. This makes the left lung slightly smaller and narrower than the right. Each lobe acts like its own functional unit. It has its own set of small airways and blood vessels. This means that one part of the lung can continue working even if another part is injured or diseased. It's a quiet kind of backup, a soft resilience built into the design. Together, these lobes fold and unfold as we breathe. The movement is not noisy or sharp. It is calm. It is rhythmic. It happens thousands of times each day without us ever needing to ask it to. And surrounding it all is the pleura, keeping everything smooth. There is no harsh rubbing, no resistance, just lungs expanding gently into their space, just layers gliding past one another like the pages of a well-worn book. When we lie down at night, this system continues without thought. The lungs fill, the pleura shifts, the lobes open. Then, slowly, everything returns. In rare cases, the pleural space can become disturbed. If too much fluid builds up, or if air enters where it shouldn't, breathing becomes harder. But in healthy lungs, the pleura remains silent and invisible, always working, never asking for attention. It is worth pausing to appreciate this, that something so thin, so easy to overlook, could play such a key role in comfort, in quiet, in life itself. The pleura teaches us that not everything that matters is loud. Not every hero needs to be seen. As we close this section, let us return to that image, the lungs as folded cloth, rising and falling, surrounded by silk that moves like breath itself. Next, we will shift to the chest wall and diaphragm, the outer muscles that help pull air in and push it out. We will see how breath is made possible not only by the lungs, but by the body around them. Now we turn inward once again, not toward the air itself, or even the lungs, but to the gentle movements that allow the breath to enter and then leave. This is the quiet choreography of inhalation and exhalation. It happens without thought, without effort, again and again. Yet it is built on structure, on physics, and on the elegant mechanics of the body. Let us begin with a single resting breath, soft, unhurried, a breath drawn in and then let go. The star of this process is a thin muscle shaped like a shallow dome. It sits at the base of the chest, separating the lungs above from the organs below. This is the diaphragm. Its movement is central to every breath we take. When we inhale, the diaphragm contracts. It moves downward, pressing gently into the abdomen. This makes the chest cavity larger. As the space expands, pressure inside the lungs falls, just slightly below the pressure of the air around us. This is called negative pressure, because nature always seeks balance. Air flows in, like water filling a low space. It moves toward the area of lower pressure into the lungs, through the airways, down to the alveoli, all guided by this quiet pressure change. Alongside the diaphragm, other muscles lend support. Between each rib are thin strips of muscle called the intercostals. When we breathe in, the external intercostals pull the ribs slightly upward and outward. This motion lifts the chest wall, adding to the expansion of space inside the thorax. Picture the chest as a soft bellows. When it opens, air is drawn in, not by force, but by flow. The lungs themselves are passive. They do not pull in air. They are not muscles. Instead, they follow the motion of the chest wall, expanding as it expands, simply because they are attached by the pleura. That delicate wrapping we spoke of earlier. It creates a connection, a quiet bond between the outer body and the lungs within. Once the air has entered and the oxygen exchanged, the body must let go. Exhalation begins. For quiet breathing, the diaphragm simply relaxes. It rises back into its dome shape. The chest cavity becomes smaller again. This change increases pressure inside the lungs, gently pushing air out, up the trachea, and back into the atmosphere. This is known as elastic recoil. It is the lungs' natural tendency to return to their resting shape after being stretched, like a soft balloon deflating without being squeezed. For deeper breaths, or when the body needs more air, such as during movement or stress, additional muscles join in. The internal intercostals help pull the ribs downward and inward. The abdominal muscles can press up from below, pushing the diaphragm higher, helping to expel more air. But at rest, it is mostly the diaphragm, always there, always moving, a silent rhythm beneath all things. Another important idea here is lung compliance. This refers to how easily the lungs can stretch. Healthy lungs are flexible. They move with little effort, but if they become stiff due to illness, inflammation, or scarring, more effort is needed. The body must work harder to fill them. Yet even in health, breathing is never truly silent. Each inhalation and exhalation carries subtle shifts in pressure, volume, and muscle tone, all working together in harmony. One breath, then another, then another. On average, we take around 12 to 16 breaths per minute while at rest. That's over 20,000 breaths a day without conscious attention, without instruction. The entire system is so efficient, so well designed that most of us never even notice it. But now, with soft awareness, we can feel the layers. Air entering, lungs expanding, muscles working, air leaving, lungs returning, each part essential, each part peaceful. When things go wrong, when illness, injury, or disease interrupt this balance, the body struggles. Conditions like asthma, chronic bronchitis, or fibrosis can make inhaling or exhaling harder. Sometimes it's the airways that narrow. Sometimes it's the tissues that stiffen. Sometimes it's the muscles that weaken. But here, we focus not on dysfunction, but on the quiet perfection of normal breathing, the way it flows, the way it adapts, the way it keeps us alive, moment by moment. Imagine now your chest as a slow-moving bellows. Inhale, exhale, a soft rise and fall, like the tide, like a leaf moving on water. Always in motion, always returning. The lungs do not think. The diaphragm does not choose, but still they serve. As we close this section, let us carry that rhythm forward, a sense of steady breathing, of subtle movement, of air entering gently and leaving just the same. Next, we will explore how this process is controlled, how the brain sends signals, how chemical sensors respond to carbon dioxide, and how the body knows exactly when to breathe again. Breathe in, breathe out, and now pause gently, because within that breath is a story, not one of sound or voice, but of molecules, tiny, invisible travelers making their way through the body. We begin now a quieter, deeper exploration, the journey of oxygen and the silent departure of carbon dioxide, where one world merges with another. Oxygen, drawn in through the nose or mouth, has reached its final destination in the lungs. Just outside the alveolar wall, thin capillaries wait. Their walls, too, are delicate, just one cell thick. Between the air in the alveolus and the blood in the capillary, a simple but powerful process occurs. It is called diffusion. Gases naturally move from areas of high concentration to areas of lower concentration. So here, where oxygen is high in the alveolus and low in the blood, it flows inward. No effort, no sound, just movement. Oxygen crosses the alveolar membrane, then the capillary wall, and finally enters the bloodstream. Inside the red blood cells is a special protein. It is called hemoglobin, and it is the true carrier of oxygen. Hemoglobin is made of 4 subunits, each containing a molecule of iron, and it is this iron that binds to oxygen, holding it briefly, carrying it forward. Each red blood cell contains hundreds of millions of these hemoglobin proteins. Together, they allow the blood to hold far more oxygen than would be possible in simple solution. This is nature's solution to a simple challenge: how to carry enough oxygen to every cell in the body. The bond between hemoglobin and oxygen is not fixed. It is flexible, responsive, depending on the conditions like pH, temperature, and carbon dioxide levels. Hemoglobin may hold on tightly or let go more easily. This brings us to something called the Bohr effect. It's a beautiful concept in areas of the body where cells are working hard, like muscles in motion. The environment becomes slightly more acidic. There's more carbon dioxide. The temperature may rise. In response, hemoglobin becomes more willing to release its oxygen. More oxygen is delivered exactly where it is most needed. This is not random. It is coordinated. It is intelligent, without thought. Now let's turn gently toward carbon dioxide, the quiet passenger returning to the lungs. Carbon dioxide is produced as a natural result of metabolism. As cells use oxygen to make energy, carbon dioxide is formed. It must be carried away, back to the lungs, to be released with each breath. There are 3 main ways carbon dioxide travels in the blood. First, a small amount simply dissolves in the plasma, the liquid part of blood. This part accounts for about 5% of carbon dioxide transport. Second, some carbon dioxide binds directly to hemoglobin, but not in the same spot as oxygen. It attaches at a different site, and when it does, it forms a compound called carbaminohemoglobin. This accounts for roughly 20% of carbon dioxide movement. The third and most important pathway involves chemistry. Inside red blood cells, an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase helps carbon dioxide react with water. This forms carbonic acid, which quickly breaks into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. Bicarbonate is then carried in the plasma, a safe, water-friendly form of carbon dioxide transport. Later, in the lungs, this reaction reverses. Bicarbonate is converted back into carbon dioxide, which is then exhaled. This delicate balance is part of a larger system called the acid-base balance. The blood must maintain a narrow pH range around 7.4. If it drifts too acidic or too basic, cell functions begin to fail. The bicarbonate buffer system helps prevent this. It acts like a sponge, soaking up extra acid or base, keeping the blood's chemistry steady. Now, gently, we return to hemoglobin. Just as the Bohr effect describes oxygen release in acidic environments, another effect describes carbon dioxide pickup. It is called the Haldane effect. When oxygen levels are low, such as in the tissues, hemoglobin is more likely to bind carbon dioxide. This enhances the blood's ability to carry carbon dioxide away. Then, in the lungs, where oxygen levels are high, hemoglobin releases the carbon dioxide, making room once again for oxygen. It is a quiet exchange, balanced, timed, perfected. Over millions of years, these mechanisms may seem complex. They involve chemistry, equations, and many invisible steps. But let us remember, the body performs these tasks constantly, with no awareness needed. Each breath supports the next. Each cell is nourished, and each molecule finds its place. Don't worry if all of this doesn't make perfect sense just yet. Let the ideas drift around you like mist on a still morning. With time, clarity will come. What matters now is the rhythm, the shape of the story. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Each journey guided by proteins and gradients. Each exchange soft and silent. Now, let us close this section with a simple reflection. We are beings made of breath. We live by oxygen's gift and carbon dioxide's release. Even when we sleep, the journey continues, unseen, unfelt, unceasing, from the alveoli to the cell, from the mitochondria back to the lungs. It is a cycle, a tide, and it never stops. Soon, we will look at how all of this is controlled, how the nervous system, through the brainstem, senses the levels of gases and adjusts the breath accordingly. For now, let your own breathing settle, softly, quietly, as the molecules continue their quiet voyage within. Now we move inward, away from the lungs, away from the air itself, into the center of the body's quiet command, the brain, and more precisely, the brainstem. This is where breath begins, before it ever touches the nose, before the chest rises, before the lungs expand. It begins with electrical pulses, with rhythm, with a deep kind of listening. Inside the brainstem, a part of the brain just above the spinal cord, live two key regions, the medulla oblongata and the pons. They work like a hidden orchestra conductor, gently guiding the pace and depth of each breath, not once, but all the time, day and night, without pause. The medulla is especially important. Here, nestled deep in its tissue, lies a tiny but powerful network of neurons. It is called the Prebsinger complex. You can think of it like a pacemaker, but for breathing. It generates rhythmic signals, signals that travel down the spinal cord to the muscles of breathing, the diaphragm, and and just like that, the chest rises, and air flows in. This signal is not loud, not sudden. It pulses like a soft metronome, a quiet clock that ticks beneath every moment. It is the breath beneath your thoughts. Alongside the medulla, the pons adds shape to the rhythm. It helps smooth the transitions between inhaling and exhaling. Like a gentle hand guiding a dancer, it prevents abrupt stops or irregular patterns. It softens the edges. But how does the brain know when to breathe more deeply or more quickly? That's where the body's sensors come in. Spread throughout your system are tiny detectors. They sense the levels of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH, the acidity of the blood. There are two main groups. First, the central chemoreceptors. These are located right within the brainstem itself, not directly, but through the change in acidity it creates in the brain's fluid. When carbon dioxide rises, acidity increases. The central chemoreceptors detect this and send a signal. Breathe deeper, breathe faster, remove the excess gas. Then there are the peripheral chemoreceptors. They are found in the carotid arteries, the vessels in your neck, and in the aortic arch, just above the heart. These sensors can detect low oxygen levels, as well as changes in carbon dioxide and pH. They act more quickly than the central ones, like early warning systems, alerting the brain if something shifts suddenly. There are also baroreceptors, sensors that detect pressure, found in similar locations. They can influence breathing when blood pressure changes. For example, during a sudden drop in pressure, breathing might quicken. It's another layer of protection, another quiet voice in the conversation. All of these signals, from chemoreceptors, baroreceptors, the Prebsinger complex, the medulla and the pons, blend together, not chaotically, but like instruments in harmony, each one responding, adjusting, balancing. And the beautiful part is, you don't need to think about any of this. Most breaths happen automatically, about 20,000 times a day, without a single conscious decision. It is only when you choose, during speech, during song, during deep breathing, that your mind steps in. Override the automatic centers. You can hold your breath, take a deep inhale, sing a note, but soon the automatic system returns, quietly, patiently, to keep you alive. Even emotions can affect breathing. The limbic system, the part of the brain tied to emotion, can speed up the breath in fear or slow it in calm. That is why breath and feeling are so closely linked. Imagine now the brainstem deep in the base of the skull, breathing not with lungs, but with patterns, with pulses of activity, its neurons lighting up, one after another, sending life down the spinal cord, to the diaphragm, to the chest wall, and back again. Imagine how delicately tuned this system must be, how precise, how quiet, how it listens to the gases in your blood, how it whispers adjustments, even as you sleep. There is a reason why meditation often begins with the breath, because the breath is a bridge between conscious and unconscious. The Prebsinger complex, this tiny cluster, pulses steadily like a candle flame, lighting the way for each inhale and each exhale, forever responding, forever balancing. The nervous system and the respiratory system are not separate. They are partners, holding hands in silence, adjusting pace, delivering oxygen, clearing waste. Take a moment now to breathe deeply, not because you must, but because you can. And know that somewhere within you, silent circuits are always watching, always adjusting, so that life can continue. Soon, we will explore how the respiratory system protects itself through reflexes like coughing and sneezing, and defenses like mucus and cilia. But for now, let the breath continue, unnoticed, unforced, perfectly timed by the brain behind the breath. Let us now return to the beginning, before the lungs ever filled with air, before the first breath, before the chest even formed. There was silence, a stillness within the womb, and inside that protected world, the respiratory system quietly began to take shape. In the early weeks of development, around the 4th week of pregnancy, something small appears. A tiny groove forms along the inner lining of the embryo. This groove deepens and divides. It is called the laryngotracheal groove, a long word for a simple early fold. From this groove, a bud begins to grow. This is the lung bud, the very first sign of the lungs. It is not yet a structure for breathing. There is no air, but the blueprint has been drawn. As the days pass, the bud branches. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, and from there, the process repeats again and again. Each new branch is smaller than the last. Just like a tree, the lungs begin to form a complex network of tiny airways. First the bronchi, then the bronchioles. Eventually, these branches lead to the early versions of alveoli, the tiny air sacs that will one day exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. During this time, the lungs are filled not with air, but with fluid. The fetus does not breathe in the womb. Instead, it receives oxygen through the placenta, a shared life source connecting mother and child. From the mother's blood, oxygen passes across membranes into the baby's blood. Carbon dioxide flows in the opposite direction, and so the lungs remain quiet, preparing. Now imagine the alveoli forming like tiny bubbles. They appear in clusters. Their walls remain thick at first, but slowly they become thinner, delicate, ready to allow gases to pass through. And yet they are not enough on their own. For gas exchange to happen smoothly, these alveoli need protection. Their inner surfaces must stay open, but tiny sacs tend to collapse inward. This is where something special comes in, a gentle substance called surfactant. Surfactant is made by type 2 alveolar cells, tiny helpers that line the alveoli. Surfactant reduces surface tension like a drop of oil on water. It keeps the alveoli from sticking shut. It allows them to remain open with each breath. Production begins late in pregnancy, around week 24, but it increases sharply after week 32 by full term. The lungs are usually rich in surfactant, and the baby is ready. If the baby is born too early, before enough surfactant is made, breathing can be difficult. This condition is known as neonatal respiratory distress syndrome. In such cases, doctors may give artificial surfactant or medications to help the baby make more of their own. A reminder that even the gentlest systems need support. Meanwhile, the heart prepares its part of the story. In the womb, the blood flow is different. The lungs are not yet working, so most blood bypasses them. Special vessels, like the asterisk ductus, arteriuses, and foramen, oval asterisk, create shortcuts. They send blood from the right side of the heart directly to the rest of the body. After birth, these shortcuts are no longer needed, and within hours, or sometimes days, they close. It is a graceful transition. Then comes the moment of birth, a shift like no other. The baby leaves the womb, the umbilical cord is cut, and suddenly there is no placenta, no external support. The baby's chest rises, and for the first time, air rushes in. The lungs inflate, the alveoli stretch. Open surfactant coats their surfaces, helping them stay wide. Blood begins to flow through the lungs' capillaries, and gas exchange begins. Just like that, a silent system awakens. It is a moment of great change. The ductus arteriosus and foramen ovale begin to close. The fetal circulation pattern shifts to an adult one. From this point forward, the lungs will take over the work of oxygen delivery. And so, the system that developed in fluid, that grew without air, now becomes the very center of life. Breath by breath, moment by moment. The development of the respiratory system is a story of preparation, a story of folding and branching, of quiet formation, of waiting and then beginning. Today, the lungs continue to grow after birth. Alveoli increase in number throughout childhood. New pathways form. The lungs adapt to the world, to movement, to speech, to rest. The memory of those early stages remains hidden, but it is within each breath we take, each rise of the chest, each whisper of exhale. So, as we return to the present, to this very breath, we remember that it began long ago, in silence, in the dark, in the warmth of the womb. A system was built, gently, carefully, so that this breath, the one you are taking right now, could arrive with ease. Breathe in slowly, and then breathe out. What you just felt, the gentle in and out, holds more than just air. It carries a story of space, motion, and rhythm. The science of breathing doesn't stop at structures or muscles. It continues into something softer, something invisible, yet something we can measure. Imagine a still lake. Then imagine dropping a pebble into its center. Ripples move outward. That ripple, that motion, is like each breath, small, predictable, but full of meaning. When we talk about respiratory volumes, we are talking about how much air moves in and out of the lungs. Not just the total, but how much with each breath, how much we can force, how much we can hold back. These volumes are invisible to the eye, but we can measure them, and from that, we can learn about lung health, effort, and capacity. Let's begin with something gentle. Asterisk, asterisk, tidal volume. Asterisk, asterisk, tidal volume is the amount of air you breathe in or out during normal, quiet breathing. It is the breath you take while reading, while resting, without thinking. On average, for an adult, this is about 500 milliliters. That's roughly the size of a small water bottle. Now picture a wave rolling softly onto the beach. That is tidal volume, gentle, rhythmic, steady. It reflects the peaceful exchange of air during moments of calm. Next comes asterisk, asterisk, inspiratory reserve. Volume, asterisk, asterisk. This is the extra air you can inhale after taking a normal breath in. It's the air you might pull in when you yawn deeply, when you try to take in more. This reserve can be about 3,000 milliliters. It is there when we need it, during exercise or moments of exertion, like a balloon expanding just a little more. In contrast, expiratory reserve volume is what you can forcefully exhale after a normal breath out. It is like pushing the last bit of air from your lungs. We don't use this reserve with every breath, but it's available when we want to. Clear the lungs. This might be around 1,100 milliliters. Then there is residual volume, the air that stays behind. Even after the deepest exhale, your lungs do not empty completely. There is always some air left, about 1,200 milliliters. This remaining air keeps the lungs open, like air left in a balloon that's never fully deflated. It prevents collapse. It keeps the system stable between breaths. Now bring these pieces together. When we add the tidal volume, inspiratory reserve, and expiratory reserve, we get something called vital capacity. This is the maximum amount of air you can move in and out with a full breath cycle. It represents the usable space, the air that participates in the breath of life. Vital capacity is usually around 4,500 to 5,000 milliliters. It's the breath you take before diving into water or before blowing out candles on a birthday cake. But if we also include residual volume, the air that never leaves, we get total lung capacity. This is the full size of the lungs, all the air they can hold in every corner. For most adults, this is about 6,000 milliliters, 6 full liters of potential. These measurements are not just numbers. They tell stories about our lungs, about how flexible they are, how strong, and how well they recover after illness. To measure these volumes, doctors use a tool called a spirometer. It's a simple device, a tube to breathe into, a machine to record the results. The process is calm and controlled. A person breathes in, then breathes out fully, sometimes softly, sometimes with force. The curves and lines produced are called spirometry graphs. From them, we learn about flow, speed, obstruction, restriction. In healthy lungs, the air flows easily, like wind through an open window. In diseases like asthma, the flow is narrowed, like wind trying to pass through a closed door. In restrictive diseases like pulmonary fibrosis, the total volume may shrink. The lungs cannot expand fully. It's like breathing into a balloon that has lost its stretch. One key value from spirometry is FEV1, or forced expiratory volume. In 1 second, it measures how much air a person can force out in the first second of a strong exhale. It is a marker of airway strength and openness. Another value is FVC, forced vital capacity, the total amount exhaled during that effort. Comparing these values helps doctors see patterns. A low FEV1 may suggest blocked airways. A low FVC may suggest stiff lungs. The ratio between the two helps guide diagnosis, but the test is simple. Breathe in, breathe out, and let the numbers speak. Even in rest, these volumes adjust. When we lie down, tidal volume might change. When we sleep, breathing slows. During a run, vital capacity is tested. The lungs adapt, always shifting, always balancing. Children have smaller volumes. Athletes may have larger ones. A singer, a swimmer, a deep-sea diver, each tells a different story through their lung capacity. Breathing is invisible, yet through these volumes, we can see its shape, its strength, its grace. As we breathe right now, calmly, gently, we become aware of these spaces inside us, not as numbers on a page, but as rhythms, as tides, as movements flowing in and out. Tidal volume, inspiratory reserve, expiratory reserve, residual volume, vital capacity, total lung capacity. Each one is a layer, a thread in the fabric of respiration. Together, they give form to the formless. They measure what we cannot see, but what we always feel. With every breath, something enters. Air, yes. Invisible particles drifting on the breeze. Yet despite this, despite breathing in thousands of times each day, most of us remain healthy. Our lungs stay clear. The alveoli, those fragile chambers of exchange, remain protected. This is not an accident. It is the result of quiet guardianship, layered defenses, a soft, silent army always standing watch. The respiratory system does not only receive, it also defends. Let us begin at the entrance, the nose. Before the air reaches the lungs, it must pass through the nasal passages. Inside the nose are small, coarse hairs. These hairs trap large particles like dust or pollen right at the gateway. Just beyond the nasal hairs lies another layer. The lining of the nasal cavity is covered with mucus, thick, sticky, and rich in defense. Mucus acts like flypaper. It catches invaders, bacteria, viruses, smoke, and it holds them still so they cannot travel deeper. This mucus is not still. It rides on an escalator, a moving surface powered by tiny hairs called cilia. Cilia are like rows of tiny oars. They beat in harmony, in one direction, upward and outward. Imagine a gentle tide, always pushing debris out of the lungs and toward the throat. This is the mucociliary escalator, one of the lung's most elegant protections. Cilia are found throughout the respiratory tract, from the nose to the larger bronchi. They sweep constantly, rhythmically, moving trapped particles away from the delicate alveoli. If a particle bypasses these upper defenses, the body does not remain passive. There is the cough reflex. Picture this: a bit of dust reaches your trachea. Instantly, sensors are triggered. It commands the diaphragm and intercostal muscles to contract powerfully, but it is protective. It clears the airway. It keeps the lungs clean. Even in sleep, the body will wake to cough if needed. Farther down the tree, inside the smaller bronchioles and alveoli, the defenses become more cellular. This is the domain of alveolar macrophages. Macrophages are a type of white blood cell. Their name means big eaters, and that is what they do. They patrol the deepest parts of the lung. They search for invaders, bacteria, fungi, particles, and engulf them. These cells are slow-moving, but tireless. They digest what they capture. Alveolar macrophages are silent workers. You will not feel them. You will not hear them, but they are there, standing guard over every alveolus. In healthy lungs, they maintain a careful balance. They defend without causing damage. They are like gentle shepherds, firm but kind. In times of illness, like during an infection, other immune cells rush in, neutrophils, lymphocytes, each with a role. Together, they form a response. But even in health, the lungs remain alert. There is also a thin layer of fluid that lines the alveoli. These proteins attach to bacteria or viruses and mark them for removal. They are part of the innate immune system, the body's first response, always ready. Each defense might seem small, but together they form a strong, layered system, a soft shield that adjusts moment to moment. Air pollution, smoking, or illness can damage this system. Cilia can become paralyzed. Mucus can become thick and hard to move. Macrophages can become overwhelmed. And when defenses are weakened, infections can take hold. That is why, even now, your lungs are monitoring, watching, sweeping, clearing. Think of your lungs not just as passive organs, but as alert spaces, aware, ready. You breathe in air, but you also breathe in the world, and still your body protects you. Right now, with every breath, mucus is trapping particles. Cilia are sweeping them away. Macrophages are patrolling the alveoli, and your brainstem, deep and quiet, is listening for any signal of threats. Even as you sleep, these defenses stay awake. They do not rest, they do not complain, they simply protect. This is the quiet vigilance of the respiratory system, a system that does more than take in oxygen. It shields, it selects, it responds, like a castle with many gates. Each gate watched, each guard gentle but strong. As we come to the end of this section, take another breath. Feel the quiet passage of air. Know that unseen, many layers stand between you and harm. They are defended, softly, steadily, always. The breath changes quietly, but surely, with the world around us. The lungs are not rigid machines. They are flexible, responsive, alive. They listen to the body's needs and the world's conditions, and they adjust. Whether you are standing at sea level, or sleeping at night, climbing a mountain, or running toward a finish line, your breathing adapts. Let us begin high above. Imagine yourself walking a quiet trail in the mountains. The air feels thinner, cooler. Each breath feels a little deeper, a little more deliberate. At high altitudes, the air pressure is lower, and with lower pressure, each breath brings in less oxygen. Even though the oxygen content in the air remains the same, the number of oxygen molecules per breath is reduced. This is why the body must adapt. One of the first changes is simple. You breathe faster. This is called increased ventilation. The brain senses lower oxygen levels in the blood. It responds by signaling the breathing muscles to work a little harder, more breaths per minute, deeper inhales. This increased breathing helps bring in more oxygen, but it also causes more carbon dioxide to leave the body. When carbon dioxide drops too low, it can lead to changes in blood pH, making it more alkaline. To compensate, the kidneys begin to adjust, helping restore balance. This takes hours, sometimes days. If the body stays at high altitude for longer, it makes deeper changes. The kidneys produce a hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO. This hormone tells the bone marrow to make more red blood cells. With more red blood cells, the blood can carry more oxygen, even when each breath contains less. This is one reason people who live at high altitudes in the Andes, the Himalayas, or the Ethiopian highlands often have higher red blood cell counts. Their bodies have adapted over time, quietly, efficiently. Now return from the mountains. Come back to sea level. This time, imagine the body in motion, running, cycling, climbing stairs. During physical activity, the demand for oxygen increases. Muscles use oxygen to produce energy. They also release more carbon dioxide as a waste product. The lungs respond instantly. Ventilation increases, more breaths per minute, and more air per breath. The heart beats faster, pumping blood quickly from the lungs to the muscles. Oxygen is delivered. Carbon dioxide is removed. This process is beautifully timed. During exercise, tiny blood vessels in the lungs, called capillaries, open wider. More blood flows through. The surface area for gas exchange increases. This improves the match between ventilation and blood flow, a balance called asterisk ventilation perfusion, coupling asterisk. As the exercise continues, the body begins to shift. Muscles make more myoglobin, a protein that stores oxygen. The lungs become more efficient at handling changes in pressure. Even the mitochondria, the tiny energy factories inside cells, increase in number. This allows muscles to use oxygen more efficiently. Over time, with regular physical activity, the entire respiratory system becomes more adaptable. It learns to respond faster, to breathe smarter, not just harder. Now imagine the opposite of motion, stillness, the body at rest, in sleep. During sleep, breathing slows. The rhythm becomes soft and steady. The brain still controls the breath, mostly through the medulla and pons, but with fewer demands. Muscle tone in the airways decreases slightly. Breathing becomes more shallow. Oxygen levels in the blood may dip a little. Carbon dioxide may rise just a bit. This is normal. The body adjusts. It knows how to breathe in sleep, but sometimes breathing is disrupted. This is known as sleep apnea. In obstructive sleep apnea, the upper airway becomes too relaxed. The soft tissues at the back of the throat collapse inward, blocking airflow. The breath pauses for seconds at a time. The brain senses the drop in oxygen. It sends a signal to wake the body, just enough to restore breathing. This can happen dozens of times each hour. Sleep apnea is more common in people who are overweight, but it can affect anyone. It often goes unnoticed. Only fragments of sleep felt as morning fatigue. There is also central sleep apnea, where the brain fails to send proper signals to the breathing muscles. This form is less common and often linked to certain medical conditions. Though these pauses are brief, they can disturb the deep rhythms of rest. Fortunately, treatments exist. Gentle air pressure machines, mouthpieces, and other tools that help keep airways open during sleep. Even during these challenges, the respiratory system is trying to maintain balance, to adapt, to restore. It is not just in mountains, or in motion, or in dreams. Even at rest, in heat or cold, in laughter or silence, the breath shifts. It adjusts to posture, to emotion, to illness, to effort. This is the beauty of the system. It does not simply perform, it responds. From the alveoli to the diaphragm, from brainstem to bloodstream, the breath listens to carbon dioxide, to oxygen, to pressure, to need, and through it all, it keeps going. One breath, then another, always adjusting, always serving. Let that remind us, the respiratory system is not fixed. It is a partner, flexible, quietly wise. It prepares us for challenge. It restores us in rest. And like all great systems, it does so without asking for thanks. The breath, when steady, often goes unnoticed, soft, reliable, unspoken. But when something disturbs its rhythm, we become aware. Suddenly, we notice each inhale, each exhale, each effort. The respiratory system, like any part of the body, is vulnerable. It can become inflamed, blocked, weakened, scarred. In this calm and thoughtful section, we explore several common respiratory conditions. We do so gently, not to frighten, but to understand. Science gives us a language for what goes wrong, and understanding brings compassion. Let us begin with asthma. Asthma is a condition in which the airways, the tubes that carry air in and out of the lungs, become overly sensitive. In people with asthma, these airways may swell, tighten, and produce extra mucus. This narrows the path for airflow, making it harder to breathe. Asthma can be triggered by many things: dust, cold, air, exercise, even stress. Each trigger causes the airways to react, like an overly alert guard, raising an alarm too quickly. The main symptoms are shortness of breath, wheezing, coughing, and a tight feeling in the chest. For many, these symptoms come and go. For others, they persist. What causes this condition? The answer is complex. Genetics play a role. So do environmental exposures, especially in early life. Inside the lungs of someone with asthma, the lining of the airways is inflamed, always slightly irritated. When a trigger appears, the muscles around the airways tighten suddenly. This is called bronchoconstriction. At the same time, the airways produce extra mucus, which further blocks airflow. Imagine trying to breathe through a narrow straw. That's what an asthma attack may feel like. But there is support. Medications called bronchodilators help relax the airway muscles. Steroids reduce inflammation over time, and by avoiding known triggers, many people live full, active lives with asthma. Now, let's shift softly to a different condition, one that develops more gradually. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. It includes two closely related conditions, chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Most often, it is caused by long-term exposure to irritants, especially cigarette smoke. In chronic bronchitis, the airways become swollen and filled with thick mucus. This is not a temporary cough, but a long-lasting inflammation. The body tries to protect itself, but over time, the defenses wear thin. In emphysema, the alveoli, the tiny air sacs where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged, become damaged. Their walls break down, forming larger, less efficient spaces. This reduces the surface area for gas exchange. And because these sacs also lose their elasticity, air becomes trapped. The result, it becomes harder to exhale. Breathing feels like trying to push air out of a balloon that has lost its shape. People with COPD may experience a chronic cough, difficulty breathing during exertion, wheezing, and frequent respiratory infections. COPD is progressive, meaning it often worsens with time. But treatments exist. Inhalers can open airways. Pulmonary rehabilitation improves stamina. And most importantly, stopping smoking can slow the disease's progression dramatically. As we continue, let us now consider pneumonia. Unlike the other conditions we've described so far, pneumonia is usually sudden. It is an infection of the lungs caused by bacteria, viruses, or sometimes fungi. In pneumonia, the air sacs fill with fluid or pus. This blocks oxygen from passing into the bloodstream. The body responds with fever, cough, chills, and difficulty breathing. The infection can affect just one part of the lung called lobar pneumonia, or it can spread across many areas called bronchopneumonia. The elderly, the very young, and those with weakened immune systems are especially vulnerable. Thankfully, many cases of pneumonia can be treated with rest, fluids, and antibiotics if the cause is bacterial. For others, antiviral medications or supportive care may be needed. Pneumonia reminds us how delicate the lungs are, how important it is to protect them from pathogens. This is why vaccines for the flu, for certain types of pneumonia, can play a vital role in prevention. Finally, let us explore pulmonary fibrosis, a quieter, slower condition, but no less serious. Pulmonary fibrosis is a disorder where the tissue of the lungs becomes scarred and stiff. Over time, this scarring thickens the walls of the alveoli, making it harder for oxygen to pass into the blood. The cause is not always known, In some cases, it is linked to long-term exposure to dust, certain chemicals, or radiation. In other cases, it is linked to autoimmune diseases, where the body mistakenly attacks its own lung tissue. Sometimes, the cause remains unknown. This is called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Symptoms build slowly: a dry cough, shortness of breath during a walk, fatigue, weight loss. There is no cure, but treatments can slow progression. Medications may reduce the inflammation and scarring. Oxygen therapy helps ease the work of breathing, and some may become candidates for lung transplantation. Even in its stillness, pulmonary fibrosis is a reminder of how vital lung flexibility is. Scar tissue does not stretch, and when the lungs lose their softness, breathing becomes a challenge. Yet, even here, there is room for calm care, for patience, and for empathy. Across all these conditions, asthma, COPD, pneumonia, pulmonary fibrosis, the story is not just about illness. It is about adaptation, support, and understanding. The body is always trying to restore balance, even when the lungs are inflamed, or damaged, or fighting off infections. Science helps us read the signals, treat the causes, relieve the symptoms, but just as important is a quiet awareness, a compassion for those who wake up each day with effort in their breath, who carry oxygen tanks, who cough in the quiet, who rest between stairs. Breathing is not always easy. For some, it is a conscious act, every minute, every step, and yet the body keeps going. The lungs, even when challenged, continue their work. This is not weakness, this is resilience. As we close this section, let us carry that thought gently. The breath may be disrupted, but understanding can bring peace. And even in illness, there is always room for healing. Let us slow down now. Let us soften our attention. We've walked together through the winding pathways of the respiratory system, from the very first inhale to the invisible exchanges that keep us alive. And now, as this journey nears its close, we return gently to where we began, with breath, simple, quiet, constant. Air enters through the nose or mouth. It flows inward, guided by curves, warmed by tissues, filtered by fine hairs and gentle mucus. It moves down the trachea, held open by silent rings of cartilage. It splits into bronchi, then smaller bronchioles, and at last it reaches the alveoli, tiny air sacs, delicate, moist, waiting. Their oxygen crosses into blood. Carbon dioxide crosses out. The breath gives, the breath receives. A quiet exchange, repeated over and over, tens of thousands of times each day, and the blood, rich now with oxygen, flows on to the heart, to the body, to the cells, where tiny engines, called mitochondria, wait. These engines take the oxygen and use it to unlock energy from sugars, from fats, fueling muscles, thoughts, warmth, fueling you. And as the body works, it creates carbon dioxide, a soft byproduct, which returns through veins to the lungs to be exhaled. Another exchange, another release. This is the loop, the rhythm, the quiet miracle of breathing. But behind it all, another layer remains. The breath is not just mechanical, not just chemical. It is also watched over by the brainstem, always listening, tracking carbon dioxide, sensing oxygen, adjusting the rhythm, speeding it up, slowing it down. And unless we choose to notice, it all happens without effort, without needing to be remembered. The body breathes for us. In sleep, in study, in joy, in grief, the breath remains faithful, anchoring, present. We have also explored how the lungs defend themselves, with layers of protection from nasal hairs to mucus to tiny cilia waving upward like underwater grass. Through the cough, the reflex, the quiet alertness of the immune cells, we looked too at what happens when the system falters. Inflammation, constriction, scarring, infection. But even there, we found resilience and healing and science. And as we ventured through high altitudes, deep sleep, and physical effort, we saw the breath adjust, strengthen, adapt. It always seeks balance. Now, as we rest here at the end, there is no need to remember every term, no need to hold every detail. Let them settle like dust in morning light. Instead, rest in the rhythm, the inhale, the exhale, the knowing. Your lungs, even now, are working, expanding, relaxing, delivering oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide. Quietly, faithfully, with every breath, a quiet renewal. With every breath, a reminder that you are here. The breath is always with you. As you listen now, perhaps lying still, or simply resting your eyes, feel the air as it moves. Feel the coolness of the inhale, the softness of the exhale. Maybe your chest rises, or your belly expands. Whatever shape it takes, let it be. Unforced, natural, present. This is not just physiology. This is not just science. To the quiet breath you take now in stillness. The respiratory system has always been your companion since your very first moment until your last. You've inhaled cold air and warm air, clean air and scented air. You've held your breath in awe. You've sighed in relief. You've laughed until you couldn't breathe. You've whispered, sung, yawned, all of this. So as we bring this journey to a close, take one more gentle breath in and rest. Inhale, exhale. Let the story of the lungs fade into the background now, like a book closed, but not forgotten. The knowledge remains, tucked softly in the folds of your memory, ready when you need it, but not needing to be held tightly. Let the breath guide you now, back to calm, back to stillness, back to sleep. And as the lungs rise and fall, let this final breath remind you, you are here, you are breathing, and that is enough.